Hello and welcome to Penmanship, a podcast about Australian writing culture. I'm your host, Andrew McMillen. The first episode for 2016. If you're a returning listener, welcome back. If you're a new listener, welcome. This is my podcast where I interview writers, journalists, authors, editors, and songwriters about their creative process and how they built a career around working with words. It's been about 2 months between episodes, and good reason for that. First Christmas and the New Year break, but also I've been finishing the manuscript for my second book, which perhaps you'll hear more about that later in the year. But for now, episode 18, Ed Kuepper. If you're a regular listener of Penmanship, you'll already be familiar with at least one of his many songs, as the podcast's theme music is Eternally Yours by his band Laughing Clowns, which he formed in Sydney in 1979. But if you're a fan of Australian music, there's a good chance you've heard a few others too. Perhaps the title track to the 1976 album I'm Stranded by Brisbane punk rock band The Saints, or a single named The Way I Made You Feel from his 1991 solo album Honey Steals Gold. He has been writing, recording and performing music in Australia and around the world for more than 40 years, and to my ears he is one of the country's most distinctive and memorable guitarists too. December 2015 marked the release of Ed Kuepper's 50th album, Lost Cities, though depending on how you count his prolific solo catalogue, that number might be as high as 100. After exploding out of the gates with the incendiary, distorted guitar tone in The Saints, it's been fascinating to watch him shift across several genres and playing styles, to end up with the sparse arrangements heard on this album. When reviewing Lost Cities for The Australian, I wrote that, quote, "There's nobody quite like him operating in Australian music today, and that he continues to invest in this work is a gift." In a sense, the album was a gift to himself too. Its release coincided with Ed's 60th birthday. I first interviewed Ed at his home in the southwest Brisbane suburb of Sherwood for Mess and Noise in 2010, where we spoke about the song Eternally Yours at some length. I returned to the same house on a quiet Sherwood Street in late February 2016 to interview Ed on his back deck with his dog Oscar lying on the ground between us. You'll hear cicadas, planes and garbage trucks in the distance as we discuss why Ed thinks fuzz box guitar distortion sounds, quote, piss weak, how he avoids retreading the same ground when writing songs, how his writing has progressed between The Saints, Laughing Clowns and his solo career, his experiences with touring as a member of Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds a few years ago, and whether songwriting gets easier with age. Introducing Ed Kuepper, songwriter and musician. Ed Kuepper, welcome.
Thank you.
It's 10 a.m. on a Tuesday. How does this fit into your usual routine as a songwriter, musician?
I have pretty erratic hours, so anything goes to some extent.
So you're not the kind of writer who decides they have to sit down at the desk at 9 a.m. and leave at 12, anything like that?
I'd like to be. I'd like to sort of start at about 4 or 5.
Uh-huh.
I like the period of time before the dawn, in particular.
Has that always been the case with your writing?
No, that's what I like to do. I don't always do that.
Okay.
I think it really helps to set a period of time aside. I think when, but you just basically find the time to do it. When I first started writing, I was either going to school or going to work, and so you do the writing on the weekend or at night, whenever you could, when you're supposed to be doing homework or something like that.
Do you think bringing that discipline to the writing adds to the quality, or adds to helping you get into that same kind of mindset each time?
It enables you to actually get something finished, which is really important. It's a lot of ways it's quite easy to get a few ideas. It's doing something with them that is the hard part, and the only way you can really do that is to put the time into it. And sometimes I'm quite slow. You know, I'll have an idea, seemingly very simple idea, and I can just spend hours kind of riffing on it, you know, either trying to work out what to do with it, playing it over and over again, and it just takes a long time before it actually sort of makes any, before I can kind of step back from it and think, yeah, that's actually good.
Would that be generally a musical idea or a melody?
Yeah, I guess I was specifically talking about music then. Lyric writing is a slightly different process for me, and they don't always go together. Sometimes they have to be sort of, you know, forcibly hammered and bolted together to work. Sometimes they, you know, just flow really easily, other times they don't. But yeah, for a musical idea, it's because a lot of my writing, depending on how I'm doing it, how it originates, because there's different ways of writing. There's sort of guitar-based writing. There's, say, more experimental kind of writing, which, you know, in the old days, I guess I would do with 4-track cassettes. These days it's much, you know, easier to kind of just carry a laptop or something around the place. But for what I would call my principal form of writing, which would be guitar-based writing, because I'm not a particularly good piano player. I do a little bit of keyboards, but I tend to add that later. It's not the main way of writing. So in the process of writing, and a really important part of that is how I actually play. The actual performance, to me, is a part of the composition. I think it's something that can often be overlooked, and people often make a big thing of saying, well, you know, a good song is a good song irrespective. I don't actually think that's absolutely true in all cases. You know, there are things that are actually very performance orientated, and that's a really important part of it, and they're still great songs, sort of thing. So I'm not talking about myself there.
Of course not.
But yeah, it's a, you know, there isn't a set format, but part of what I find is some of my strongest writing is the stuff that comes out of a performance. Just something that's kind of unique about the way that I play, or something like that.
Will you find yourself running tape for, say, hours on end, and maybe going back and listening and isolating a certain part or a riff that you've come up with as part of that process?
I wish I did sometimes. I don't do enough of that. I often just start working and then think, oh, this is a good idea, I'll start recording, by which time I've already forgotten what it was that I was doing. But
well, isn't the idea then, if it comes back to you, it was worth remembering? Well, pardon me, I think that's something that you can kind of tell yourself to maybe not feel quite so bad. I think sometimes there's a situation where something really sort of special happens, when it kind of is almost accidental, or it's almost, you know, a subconscious kind of expression. To me, a lot of something quite unpredictable happens, and, you know, you sometimes sort of come up with a particular progression or a sort of a melodic shift or something that maybe, if you were sort of more consciously going for something, wouldn't quite happen. So I quite like that. It's almost like it's an accidental thing, except it isn't, because it's coming from you. So you can feel good about it. Well, I guess after having played guitar for almost your entire life, certainly your adult life, you find yourself playing in certain phrases and chords and going back over certain arpeggios and fingerings and things. How do you kind of trick yourself out of falling into those old habits to find something new?
I'm not even sure these days if I go out of my way to do that. I think one of the things that I've always done is try to avoid what other people are doing, you know, as much as you can, given that we're all sort of speaking roughly the same sort of language. Sometimes I purposely go back to a period of time where I've been working and that I've forgotten what I was doing at that stage, and hear something that I'd completely forgotten that I'd done, and that in itself kind of inspires doing something new. That's always a really great experience to have that.
So kind of mining your back catalogue for new ideas in a sense.
Well, it kind of came out of, it's been something that I've really been doing for a long time, and that is looking at older material, because, you know, I do tour a lot, and I suppose a lot of people have, you know, an expectation that you will play some older material, and so I always do, but I kind of always like to look at it in a different sort of way. And it's sometimes it's interesting when you go back over a period of time and you kind of, you know, it's only just relatively recently that I've discovered, or it's kind of, you know, something that I've just done since the very beginning of my playing. I've never played bar chords, ever.
Huh.
There's probably not a single example across, you know, the dozens of recordings that have me playing bar chords.
Is there a reason for that? Did you consciously avoid them?
I think I must have from the very outset. I didn't like the sound of them. And
good reason.
You know, now I kind of, you know, when I play one, I think, oh, isn't that exotic? And yet it's the most cliched way of playing. I think the only time I've only ever done it if I've tried to copy what somebody else is doing. I never do it in my own music. So, no, they're all just, you know, incomplete chords, and yeah. So there you go. I'm not sure if that has any bearing on what we're talking about, but that,
no, absolutely.
That's the kind of thing that, you know, is quite a pleasant sort of thing to come across. And once I sort of then realised that, I thought, well, you know, I'll actually emphasise that. And because when you do get stuck, having that little bit of extra focus can just open things up incredibly.
I've written this in my reviews of your music over the years. You're one of Australia's most distinctive guitarists, in my opinion. You don't have to comment on that. How did you learn to play guitar, Ed?
Well, there's sort of two stages. When I was a kid in primary school, I took some guitar lessons. An old lady called Mrs. McCarthy, who taught me, in fact I was just talking to Jude about this yesterday, tunes from The Sound of Music and that kind of stuff, which wasn't sort of what I really wanted to play. I was much more interested in playing pop music of the time.
Yeah.
But I do actually have a real liking for a lot of that stuff that I learnt to play in those days.
So it's, say, late 1960s or early 1970s?
Actually my first lesson, I would have been mid-60s. I was only about 8 or 9 or something, you know, when I'm 10 maybe. And then that kind of developed into, she tried to introduce some jazz guitar, which I just absolutely hated. I just it made no sense to me whatsoever, and I just, you know, I quit. And then sometime later, I still had the guitar sort of thing, and I was interested in writing. I didn't get rid of the instrument. Sometimes these things appear like they might have been over a really long period of time, but it might have just been a matter of months, and they seemed like a long time because you're young, and a couple of months mean so much more to you than a couple of months do when you're older. And I think I probably, gave up for a little while. I certainly gave up lessons, and then just taught myself after that and started writing. That was sort of by the time that I realised that I wasn't going to be a jazz guitarist, I think I wanted to write, and I just saw the instrument. But I also didn't really want to be a guitarist as such. I never learnt how to play other people's songs. When I was going to high school, other people that were playing guitar would know how to play, Deep Purple songs or whatever was kind of popular with teenage boys. I could never do that.
And you didn't have an interest in it?
Not to learn how to play their songs, no, never.
So you were just making up songs from the beginning?
Pretty much. That's kind of... I think my focus was always on the kind of creation of something, as opposed to being somebody that could impress their friends, knowing how to, do Ritchie Blackmore or Jimi Hendrix or something like that. And I'm totally straight with you. I still don't know how to do that stuff. I still can't do it. Yeah.
Well, you've included covers.
Yeah, sure.
Throughout your career.
That's different though. That's
it's reimaginings almost.
Well, it's doing songs that I like in a way that I kind of feel is I make some kind of claim. By doing them, I'm not saying they're my songs or anything, but I'm at some point the song meant something to me, and I'm kind of reinterpreting it a little. Once or twice I've probably done fairly straight covers, but most of the time I don't.
So what drew you towards the high distortion, power chord sort of sound which characterised the early Saint stuff?
I don't know if the power chord, I don't know if that's an accurate sort of description, actually.
No,
I mean, if you look that up on Wikipedia, it's actually a bar chord, and I don't do bar chords. I told you that earlier.
You did. I'll go and correct that.
What drew me to that style of playing? I don't know. It just sort of developed. It sort of developed in isolation. I didn't have a band. The sound was there before the band was. I was writing songs and hoping to put a band together. My influences at that time are, reasonably well documented. I think the sort of the pivotal year for me, in some ways, if I ignore everything prior to 1971, 71 is kind of an important year because it's the year that I started buying records in quantity. I had access to a supply of records that I was able to get cheap. They weren't stolen, they were sampled via a sales rep, and he was obviously not supposed to be selling them, but I got some great stuff. I got some really great records, many really rare albums, like the David Bowie Man Who Sold the World Australian dress cover version. It's just the rarest album of Bowie's catalogue anywhere. No one even knows what it's worth because there were only 500 copies printed. I had that. I bought several copies for friends, so there's probably this little nest of them somewhere in Brisbane. There's millions of dollars worth of records just sitting there. I mean, all the music that I grew up with, in going all the way back to when I was, a toddler, and my mother would be listening to Elvis and Hank Williams and Cliff Richard and his sort of pop, the Shadows and all that kind of music. All that stuff sort of became part of what I do. I think I sort of absorbed it. I didn't draw a line between genres, and to this day I still I don't sort of really differentiate. There are just some things that I like and I don't really care what they are. I think maybe it all happened over a short period of time, but I'd say getting the Stooges' Funhouse album and getting one side of songs from the first Velvet Underground album was sort of I don't know, I think maybe with something about the way that Ron Ashton on Funhouse kind of sounded. I think I actually made an attempt to copy that, and it wasn't until years and years later that I saw the way that he actually played the stuff, and it was totally different to the way that I played it.
Maybe use bar chords?
He actually uses bar chords, and I don't. And I still can't work out how he managed to get it to sound as good as he did by using the fingerings that he did. But anyway, I kind of just did something completely different, and as I say, beyond a sort of a moment of inspiration, it's never as if I tried to sort of copy it there, but you start on something and you get a good kind of thing going with it, and then you just develop that, you just sort of, so somewhere along the lines, I mean, I had a small 5-watt amplifier or something, which, just, I don't think I even used a distortion box initially. I only started using one of those when I bought a much larger transistor amp. Before that it was just sort of amp distortion. And the thing with that kind of distortion is that it's a responsive distortion. It's not a fuzzbox distortion, which I always think sounds a bit pissweak. It's that's just sort of, press a button and you're powerful. Yeah. Whereas with I just used to hit incredibly hard. I'd break strings all the time. A lot of you can hear it on the early Saints records. There is just a degree of intensity there that is sort of bordering on the psychotic, I think, sometimes.
That's a great grab for the press release if that album was to be released tomorrow. So, yeah, I was listening to that album, the first album, again yesterday. Nights in Venice in particular is just a storm. Did that song mean more to you than the others, or did you focus more on that than...
No, not at all. No, I think we just managed... I mean, everything was... we couldn't have done more than about 1 or 2 takes on anything because of the speed with which that was recorded. And all we were going for was just basically to sort of capture what we sounded like live. And Nights in Venice just always worked. It just never failed. I don't think I've ever... I've got a few cassette recordings of live versions. It always sounds really great. That one is, they're all slightly... by different, I mean, that instrumental thing that used to change from performance to performance, but they all worked. It was actually Nights in Venice and Messing with the Kid were the first 2 songs the Saints did. I think that they go back to when we were still Kid Galahad and the Eternals.
Were you obsessed with music at that age? Just dominated your every thought and waking moment?
Pretty much. Yeah. Pretty much, to the point of being probably, a really irritating companion. Yeah, no, it was, from as early an age as I can recall, it was really, I like other things, but that was sort of all that I was really interested in. I could kind of do without, whatever other interests I had.
Your mother was into music, you mentioned. Were your parents supportive of your interest and obsession with music?
They were. I don't think that they were that wrapped in a lot of what I liked, but apart from complaining occasionally that the turntable was, the record stereo was up too loud, or the Saints used to practice in the garage, so they were reasonably supportive. They could have been a lot worse. So my parents are, very conservative, religious kind of people, so it's unusual. They weren't. They could have been quite hostile to the whole notion, and they weren't. But part of that also is just because I sort of stood my ground and asserted myself.
Were you, when you were obsessed, when you were studying, when you were listening to all of that music and playing your own, were you aiming to become a master? Was that the end goal, to master this instrument and this craft of songwriting?
No, I don't think I had an idea of what mastering it would involve. I think I wanted to... I think I had the idea that I wanted to, form the best sort of rock and roll band ever. But, I didn't think of it in terms of becoming a sort of a master musician or anything. There wasn't the kind of academic approach that I can kind of put on it in hindsight, but I didn't go through that approach at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I think things like, you could use excerpts from Nights in Venice, and it basically precedes much kind of noise, Glenn Branca. There's a whole bunch of sort of experimental guitarists that kind of appeared in the late 70s and the 80s that were the sort of little snippets in Nights in Venice that kind of precede any of that. But I think I was just after sound, just something that to me kind of elevated me, took the whole thing off onto sort of a transcendental level almost, because you just wanted to be lifted above the kind of the ordinary, of which we were surrounded by much. So.
Indeed.
And still are.
When did you first earn money from music?
Just before the Saints, or before Kid Galahad and the Eternals, I was in a band for a short period of time. I was 13, and I lied about my age and said that I was 16. And I'm sure nobody could have believed me, because everybody was in their early 20s, and there's this, I'm 16. Anyway, I played in this group, and we got a couple of gigs. We got, played a couple of football barbecue kind of things. I think I made $5 a night or something, which was good money in those days.
Yeah.
That was the first time. But those paying shows, you might have had one or two a year. Beyond that, I don't think that when the Saints were in Brisbane that we ever turned a profit. I think we always lost money on our shows. We used to put them on ourselves, and hiring halls and things, and there'd always be some idiot would, break a window, so we'd lose our bond. And so you get 30 people along at $1 a head or something, and probably come out with a $20 or $50 loss on the night or something like that. So I guess once we left Brisbane, I became professional at that stage, a professional musician at that stage. Prior to that, I was always subsidising it with working.
What were you doing? What kind of part-time jobs did you have?
They were full-time.
Oh, yeah.
My first... in the school holidays, I used to work at Hutton's Meatworks. I used to work in an abattoir. That's how I funded those records that we were talking about. The first group records were very expensive in those days, compared to what the sort of money that you could earn, and certainly compared to what they are now. I mean, if $20 or $25 is your sort of standard price for an album these days, the equivalent would put them into like $120, $150 an album if you're talking, early 70s dollars. So they were hard to get and expensive, unless
exclusive.
Yeah. Hard to get because they were so expensive, I should say.
What did you do?
Okay, so at the Meatworks, I did different sort of work, just casual holiday work, do a week of labouring and that kind of thing.
Did that harden you up? Did you see a few things that opened your eyes?
It certainly did. I mean, Jesus. It's like an insane asylum in some ways. I mean, work in the slaughterhouse for a week. I became a vegetarian. I'm no longer a vegetarian, but I did become a vegetarian for a while. The other thing is I had long hair, which immediately made you a target for all the kind of problems that the guys working there might have had.
Did you have to assert yourself in other ways?
Look, after a week of labouring, you'd physically get so strong that I could easily walk into the Oxley Hotel lounge and, not feel threatened. I think, which it's a great feeling, to not feel threatened. But that wasn't my goal there, it was a way of making money and you could basically, they didn't do checks, so you could basically kind of just fib about your age and get paid a better rate because you wouldn't have been allowed to do the work if you were underage, sort of thing. So, but nobody bothered checking. Then when I left school, my first proper job was at Astor Records in Brisbane at the warehouse. I was there for 18 months or almost 2 years. They wanted to promote me to be the North Queensland. So I knew more about music than anybody in the building, and I was offered a promotion, but it would mean moving to North Queensland, and I just thought, no, I really don't want to do this, and I quit. And
did you learn much about the creation of music on that job, or was it purely just pressing records?
No, it was just selling records, really. Right. Sort of like storing them, and talking to people, putting. In those days, you had a lot of customers that had the accounts would basically send us $500 worth of records. It wouldn't even be, we want particular titles, and so I'd go through and I'd pick, some fantastic John Lee Hooker and Lightning Hopkins and stuff that I really liked, and then the next week the rep would come in with this big box and you're not going to sell this in Townsville. No, it was okay. I mean, I was working in town, which I quite liked, and was able to do stuff. Pick up records and do shopping. The record hunting in town, which was kind of probably one of the better places to do it in those days. And after that, when I quit that, I just took a number of casual labouring jobs. Then got into the public service just before, because I was sick of the kind of private enterprise world by then, and worked at in town just at the time when the Saints had recorded through, for 6 months, and then left, and then moved into state, sort of thing. So yeah, I mean, they're always the public service job was probably the best in some ways, because I was able to do a bit of Saints promo on the tab. That was pretty good.
Like making phone calls?
Not so
Booking
much
gigs?
Not so much. No, well, there weren't gigs to book. We were our only employers at that stage. There were agents weren't coming to it. We'd been banned by everybody, so we weren't being offered shows. No, I was just able to send off promo copies of the single and that sort of thing.
Nice.
And fulfill some orders that we were starting to get from overseas, because we got some good reviews, and all the papers were nice enough to print my mum's address, and the amount of money they had to send in cash to get a copy, and that's how we operated, and it worked. It was an unusual thing for the time.
Well, are we talking hundreds of letters and cash envelopes arriving, or?
Well, we only did a bit over 500. So yeah, there would have been a couple of hundred orders, and then a couple of larger ones, and probably about 100 promo copies went out.
Was that you personally mailing them and sending them out?
I don't think I got a lot of help from anybody else from memory. So yes,
Right.
It was largely me. Yeah.
So through all those jobs you just described, that was purely in your mind as the way to fund your passion, which was music.
I don't recall having any great desire to. I can't say, that I had any sense of certainty, but I also had a sense that there wasn't going to be anything else.
For you?
Yeah. But not a sense, and by certainty, I don't think that I ever kind of told myself, you will definitely make it, and you will definitely, be on top of the pops and all that kind of thing. But I think what I did how I did operate was that I actually don't want to do anything else. This is what I'm going to do, and just see where it takes me, kind of thing.
And give it your best shot and see where you go.
Yeah, and play it by ear a little bit. Yeah, and I didn't have any idea of how the industry worked. I just basically bought a lot of music papers, copied the addresses, and just sent off records to the reviews editor. It worked in some cases, in some it didn't. It worked overseas better than it did in Australia. The Australian initial reviews were, not bad to extremely bad, whereas the overseas reviews were fantastic for the most part.
Did you
and
put
so
that
that kind of shifted everything. As soon as we got brilliant reviews in Sounds and Melody Maker, not in NME but in Sounds especially.
What was the quote, that famous quote, the album of the week and every week?
Single of this and every other week, 3 weeks in a row.
That's right.
And then the 4th week single of the year.
Yes.
They got the lead review for a month of October, which I think was sort of, it was hilarious, it felt great.
Yeah. It must be incredibly validating for you as a writer.
I always kind of, I didn't feel that I was wrong because we were being criticised locally. I had enough sense of myself and what I was doing to not be paying heed to people that were criticising us at all. I know that in a way that sort of sounds incredibly egotistical, but I don't actually feel that it is. We just basically did not think that anybody knew what they were talking about, and I actually still think that.
Well, it shows your assertiveness and your rightness and showing that you believe in what you are doing. Has that attitude towards reviews maintained throughout your career?
There's been lots and lots of reviews since. These days, I try not to sort of focus on them too much, because I think I'll start to get like... apparently Phil Collins reads a bad review and he'll then phone up the journalist and talk him through the errors.
Fact-checking, correcting.
And I thought that was really funny, actually. I mean, I'm astounded that he even bothers. I mean, given, he must just be so immune to anything like that. I think I could possibly fall into a trap like that, where somebody's written something and I think that's wrong. Even if it's positive, I don't think that that's right. You've kind of missed something there. But once you start doing that, you're better off actually not doing it and just moving on and kind of, realising that you can't sort of change people's opinions particularly, and it is too obsessive, and you're better off obsessing about music than correcting people's assumptions or opinions.
Yeah. Once you became a professional musician, a full-time person earning money from your music, did that create a tension between the passion and the professionalism, as in combining your art with money and business and earning a living?
I thought it's a really hard thing to do, and probably has, always, because once you become a business, then there's a number of people that are involved in that, record companies, management, at certain points of time, unless it's all yourself, which it is at the moment.
Yeah.
At various, people have ideas as to, how you should be doing things differently to make it more successful or whatever. Is this wind starting to go?
That's all right.
Yeah. I don't know. I think I sort of ignore a lot of things to a certain extent. I still get annoyed in certain situations, but I try to sort of just, shrug it off a little bit. Life's too short.
Well, you've been involved in the industry at several levels, from the machinations of major labels through to being independent and now a self-managed artist, I believe. Is that correct?
Yeah, kind of. I have an agent, but yeah, he looks after live stuff, but I haven't had a manager for yonks. I can't remember since how long now. Actually, it's been a long time.
Well, it's obviously worked well for you in the sense that, at least to an outsider, it doesn't seem to have detracted from the quality of the music and the quantity of the music. The fact that you're also dealing with the business aspects and all besides the booking of the shows and that kind of thing. I don't know, is that something that you take pleasure in, the fact that you can seemingly easily compartmentalise the creative and the business aspects?
No, I'd actually rather have somebody doing the business under my instruction. I'd actually rather have somebody else do that for me, because I find it really tedious. But I know enough about it to kind of direct somebody.
Right.
Or at least to have some input into it,
Okay.
But no, as far as... I'm a dreadful negotiator. I'm either too kind or too hard, it's sort of... There's no sweet middle ground at all. Either the soft touch or just the worst dead shit that's ever existed.
Well, let's jump forward to the near present. You released Lost Cities late last year. It's now been about 2 months since that was released, so it's in the rear view mirror, but perhaps not too far distant. How do you look at that album now? Are you happy with
It's still completely new to me. I've not listened to it since I finished it. I haven't started a tour for it. I'm going to have to listen to it in the next week to remind myself how it sounds, and because I am going to do a tour. I was very happy with it. To me, it's a kind of a gateway album. It's it's a new decade for me, and I think it's as significant as all my starting point albums are. Obviously the Saints, the Laughing Clowns, and then the first solo album, Electrical Storm. But then something like Today Wonder was another album where things totally shifted. I think this is in that kind of category for me. Mm-hmm. I'm playing differently. I'm doing approaching the vocals and the guitar quite differently. The writing, I'm hoping, has a combination of I'm trying to make things sparser than they've ever been, and in a way it's kind of the opposite of something. If Nights in Venice was the beginning, this is kind of the beginning of the end, I suppose, and it's moving in an opposite direction. So it has a nice arc to it.
Do you think the Ed who wrote Nights in Venice would be surprised to find the Ed of today writing music like Lost Cities?
I'm not sure if the Ed of Nights in Venice would not be surprised that the Ed of Lost Cities is actually still around. I really didn't look at it in terms of that far ahead. Looking back on it now, it seems it's just gone in it's a flash, really. I mean, my recollection of so many of those events is so vivid still that they could have happened last year. But at the time, to kind of think, 40 years on, I think I wouldn't have imagined that I'd still be alive, to be honest. I think I remember when in the mid-70s when I got my first sensational Alex Harvey Band album, and I became a really big fan of Alex Harvey, that sort of mid-70s period, and reading that he was 40, and I thought, fuck, that is so amazing that he can be good and that old for a white guy, because I was aware of black music, and so you had this history of black blues musicians kind of all going into their old age and still being fantastic. Muddy Waters I saw in the early 70s, he was brilliant, but he wasn't a young man. But there weren't sort of examples of white musicians, so Alex Harvey being, wow, he's as old as my dad almost, it's and yet he's cool. It was great. And so no, I really don't think that I could have been looking that far ahead. I think I was probably pretty happy if things went well for the next few years, kind of thing. So,
and yet, like you say, it's been 40 years of writing and performance and recording and existing as this significant entity in Australian music.
Yeah. Well, there you go.
Do you view your work with pride? Is pride the right word for your feelings when you listen back to any of your past recordings?
I don't know if I feel pride. I sometimes, if I feel good about something, I think, wow, that is actually quite good. I suppose I can kind of feel that sort of thing if I distance myself from it. But when I hear things that I did a really long time ago, I don't really listen to it in terms of, oh wow, wasn't I great? It's more, oh, that's actually quite good. I don't see it as me, oddly enough. I can listen to a Saints record and I think, oh, that's really good. That that little guitar thing is actually quite unique, and But I can only sort of think in those terms if I don't think that's me doing it. You know, I don't know if that makes any sense.
Kind of disassociation. That musician on the record sounds great.
I have to some extent, but you know, I have to also emphasise that I don't listen to it that much. So when I do on occasion listen to it and it impresses me, I think, wow, that's good. I'm glad that sounds good, not bad. I'm even starting to like a lot of the clown stuff these days. I didn't for a long, long time.
Really?
You know, so now I'm very slow at getting to like new music.
Well, let's talk about Laughing Clowns for a little, because as you well know, that period in your life is significant in terms of this podcast, because you so kindly allowed me to use Eternally Yours as the theme song for Penmanship. So for people who haven't heard Laughing Clowns, I highly recommend checking them out. But that sound in particular was quite a large leap, as you identified earlier in our conversation, between the Saints and Laughing Clowns. So how did you write for brass melodies without knowing how to play brass instruments?
Probably not knowing how to play them just made me sort of force my ideas through. It was just, you know, play this line. It wasn't sort of like, can you play this line? It was play this line. And people would, you know, the lines weren't that complicated. So. But
still, writing a great melody is got to be one of the hardest parts of music, right? A great original melody. And some of those melodies from the Clowns material just stand up easily.
Yeah, thanks. But for instance, Eternally Yours, the melody was written, I was actually thinking of that initially as an organ line, and the Clowns didn't have an organist, so it became a sax line. And then Louise does the nice the instrumental outro is her improvisation on it, but the melody line was initially, for a little while, I came across some notes, I'd forgotten it, but it was actually sort of, I was thinking an organ. And you can kind of almost sort of hear it in the way the saxophone sort of plays it. It's got the notes sort of, it's almost getting into a circular breathing kind of thing, in the same way that if you were playing an organ you wouldn't have to, you know, pause for breath.
Yeah, I can see that.
And I don't know, for the most part I think I've always just worked with musicians that are sort of open to what's asked.
Have you found throughout your career that certain musicians encourage you to reach further and achieve better things than you would just by yourself? I'm thinking here of Jeffrey Wegener, perhaps?
It's hard to answer that. If I say no, I'd have to say no. I don't think so. I think once a band is kind of formed, you take into consideration the people that are involved, and you incorporate that within the sort of concept. You know, I came back to Australia to sort of, after the Saints split, to give myself a little bit of breathing space, and also to discuss ideas with people that I knew here, because I didn't know anybody in the UK that had any interest in the sort of area that I was, you know, just to incorporate a little bit of that sort of jazz playing in drums. I knew nobody in the UK that had the vaguest interest. I knew Jeffrey had played drums briefly in the Saints and was, you know, totally hopeless at turning up, and so I had to kick him out. But we did discuss music, and so I thought, you know, Australia would be a good place to kind of just have the pressure taken off a little bit, just to give us a little bit of breathing space to kind of develop where this idea was sort of going to go. And so you draw on the people, you know, that they have input. certainly. And whether they inspire you to go further than you would, I don't think so. I think I wanted to go where I wanted to go anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But you also adjust things as you go along because maybe it just doesn't sound the way you think it's going to, So if the idea is still good, there might be some arrangement changes made, that sort of thing. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but...
It does. Just on Clowns, before we move on, you were just saying you've recently rediscovered them and found that you quite enjoy what you came up with at that time. Does that mean that when you were writing and recording those songs that you weren't so into the sound at the time? Help me understand that.
No, I was into it. I just think the Clowns kind of... When the Clowns broke up, there was a lot of animosity, and I think for a long period of time I just decided I didn't want to have... There are just too many sort of bad memories associated with the time that I just wanted a break from it. And in the process of doing that, I think the music usually is so strong that it conjures up a whole lot of recollections, both good and bad, and so I just... Plus, the other thing was, coming from the Saints, where the two albums, we did Stranded in Brisbane in '76, but then we went to the UK and recorded in a couple of really good studios doing the second and third album, with, a number of weeks to do our work, to coming back to Australia, doing the Clowns independently, and suddenly having... you might have 2 nights, midnight to dawn or something, to do a recording. I think there was always a sense on my part. I mean, if I were to do that again, I would do it differently. If we had the same sort of budgets, I think we could do it much more effectively. The mistake that I feel we made was to try and record in a traditional way whereby things would often be layered. And I think what I would do these days is just do the whole thing live in the studio, not bother about overdubbing the vocals at the end. I just do them all in one hit, because there's just a sense of disconnection sometimes which shouldn't be there. The things that even some of those things now, with the time that's passed, actually sound quite appealing to me. Somebody played me the Clowns Ghost Beat track the other day. I used to hate that because it always sounded to me like I'm just sitting there reading this lyric, and then I heard it and I thought, that is fucking great. That was just so nightmarish. Having this voiceover kind of thing, it's just, that's only something that you can, kind of a conclusion you can come to, not having heard it for years, and then hearing it out of the blue and hearing how unique it actually sounds. It wasn't my intention, but there you go. So it's not as if you have complete, certainly not over, we had enormous sort of time constraints and budgetary constraints. We were funding the records ourselves, and also having, the band constantly complaining that they weren't getting enough money and that sort of thing. So I don't want to delve into that side of the history too much, because that'll just put me in a bad mood again. But but when I listen to the actual music that we did, I'm actually, the ideas were strong, and the execution is often a lot better than it struck me at the time, even though it may not have been exactly what I was aiming for.
Well, last question on Clowns. Did the band reformed in 2009 and maybe 2010, the following year as well, for a series of shows? I saw some of them, including the one at Mount Buller, Fall Tomorrow's Parties Festival, and it was fantastic.
Yeah, thanks. I thought the Clowns were great, and the reunion shows had such a different ambience in terms of the way people got on to the way it had ended up in the 80s. No, it was fantastic. I would have loved, in a lot of ways, to have kept the Clowns going, as a sort of a side parallel kind of thing to what I do solo.
Yeah.
I love those shows.
So did though the memory of those shows, did that help soothe some of the bad memories that had previously?
I think so. I think also the process of some kind of reconciliation with the memory of the clowns started when I put Cruel But Fair together, and I was suddenly sort of thinking, oh, this stuff is actually good. But I had to look at it as a new thing, so hence the album, the compilation. It isn't in people complain that it wasn't chronological. I mean, there's a reason for that. It needed to be presented as something else, Chronology, just look it up on the web and, burn your own disc or program it on iTunes or something. But that was the start of it, and then the fact that we were able to do a reunion and not only get on, but play. The band played fantastically. I thought they were really great, and it wasn't, a straight regurgitation of what we did years ago.
Yeah.
It showed enough signs of being able something that would be able to be carried on in a valid sort of and still completely sort of unique kind of way. It just wasn't possible to do, unfortunately, but who knows?
On this podcast, I interview a range of writers, journalists, authors, editors, and songwriters such as yourself. And songwriters are unique in that, as part of the way they make a living, is to repeatedly perform their writing and their musicianship. How do you reconcile that in your head, the fact that in order to make your living you have to play songs that you've written over and over again? Is that something you take pleasure from, or is it sometimes tedious? How does that work for you?
I avoid it becoming tedious by changing the way that I play the songs. I think it would be incredibly boring to do things exactly the same every night. You'd have to be making an awful lot of money to kill the pain. And I don't make that much, so what I need to do is to sort of keep it interesting. And it works. It works for me, and I think it works for a large part of the people that come to the shows as well.
Yeah.
Sometimes it works better than it does other times, because there is always an element of, a little bit of risk-taking in it. But no, that's basically all you need to do. The idea of just doing carbon copy performances night to night is it's kind of something a bit brain numbing about it, really. So no, I'm not into that.
Well, can I ask then, you played in Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds for a time. Were those, I didn't see you perform with that band, but were those shows essentially carbon copies, or did he and his band leave space to improvise and freewheel a bit?
The first, I did 2 international tours. The first one was fantastic. It was totally open, which I really enjoyed. The second one came after was the Push the Sky Away promotional tour, and that was an album that was largely a sort of a studio creation, and it involved a number of very specific sort of pre-recorded sections that had to be included. There wasn't as much leeway from night to night as I would have liked within my own stuff. There were always, they'd play some of the older stuff, which could kind of vary dramatically, but the new stuff was fairly strictly choreographed. After I came off that tour, I decided that I'd move as far away from that as I possibly could, and so I did a by request tour with no repertoire, just basically not a list of songs for people to choose from, but just basically, say, good evening, what would you like to hear? And, which had all the potential of turning into an absolute sort of nonsense shit fight, but it worked really well.
Yeah.
And for the most part, There were probably a couple of songs that were requested. I mean, the qualification that I made on that tour was that I'd play whatever people ask from my catalogue, not
Not Kaysan.
well, I mean, I knew that there would be a couple of jokers that would kind of be calling that sort of stuff out, so I made them stand in the corner. But the qualification was that I'd play the song, but I wouldn't play it in the way that you'd remember it, probably. I'd just do it however it felt right to do that night. And so there were some, quite wildly different arrangements, sometimes which worked great, and it actually gave me a sense of some elements of those songs were stronger than I recall, because people don't necessarily call out the songs that I think are the best. They call out a whole bunch of things that I don't play for a reason, because I don't think they're very good. But there you go.
Well, I didn't realise that link between playing in the Bad Seeds and then coming back and doing the By Request tour as a way to kind of creatively stretch your wings again, I suppose.
No, I needed to kind of just, some of those Bad Seed shows were really great, but I'm not that much of a session musician. I don't think I'm somebody that you'd call in to do that kind of work. And so I think it was partly just to reassure myself I can still kind of wing it on the night, and it was a little bit of a gamble, but it worked out okay.
How did you go about preparing for those Bad Seed show? If we can dwell on this for a while longer.
We rehearsed.
We
rehearsed. I got sent the new album and kind of learnt them.
Oh, by ear, or did he give you sheet music?
No.
Can you read sheet music?
Yeah, to some extent, but
right.
I mean, nobody does that unless you're a session player. No, I got sent the songs. No, there weren't any sort of strong instructions. It was kind of worked out in rehearsal, of which we didn't have that many. All the old stuff we'd played on the previous tour, so that wasn't an issue. And on the new stuff, as I say, there's a fair amount of sort of pre-recorded stuff, so there wasn't that much to do on it anyway. A bit of standing around.
Any observations from being in the machinery of a big international band like that for the first time in a while? Playing on big stages, big crowds?
You get used to it quite quickly, It's a much larger operation than I have. I mean, a crew of all the assistants have assistants, and a fairly large crew. I mean, a big touring party, really. Yeah, I enjoyed. Some of the shows were fantastic. Others less memorable for various reasons. Not sure if I have all that much more to add to it.
Sure.
Some of it was really great.
Did you and Nick talk about writing at all? Anything you gleaned from him?
No, we did early on, sort of, a little bit, but, I mean, he and Warren are kind of fairly entwined in that region, and I think I also kind of, have to say that it's a long time since I've kind of collaborated. I did with my wife on Jean Lee and the Yellow Dog, where she did the lyrics. But for the most part, I tend to write by myself. I generally, unless I'm having some major sort sort of drama going on, I tend to be able to work okay by myself. I don't mind working with lyricists, but I like to the musical side of it. I'm usually pretty definite about, and even with the lyrics, I kind of see how they have to kind of work to the music in a lot of ways. So don't get that often.
It's alright, we've had helicopters and planes and garbage trucks. It's all on tape.
Is it today? We had
yes.
I was totally oblivious. I just had one of those micro sleeps. I didn't sleep much last night, so
you're doing fine.
Days off occasionally.
We're coming towards the end, Ed. Just
Yep.
you mentioned Gene Lee and the Yellow Dog. Great album, which I listened to yesterday for the first time in a while.
Is that right?
Tell the audience a bit about that album, because it's kind of unique in your catalogue. Concept album, right?
Yeah. It came out of me reading a book that I picked up in a disposal store, one of those discount bookstores, and my eye was caught by the Jean Lee, the last woman hanged in Australia, and I, at that stage, this was quite some, about in 2000 or something, I think 2001, and I had never heard of her, and so I bought the book, and I thought, wow, this is just incredible. And because it was written by a couple of, I can't remember the authors' names, I've got the book somewhere, but they're a couple of tabloid journalists, and so it's well written, but it's also got a real kind of, screaming headline kind of thing, and it struck me that this actually would make a great opera, and so I discussed this idea initially with Linda Javen, who you may or may not know.
I know of her. Journalist, author.
That's right. And I bought a copy of the book and sent that to her, and her response was, "Oh God, this is so bleak. I can't possibly do this." And I thought, it's a shame. Anyway, and so she came back and said, "Look, I've become a refugee advocate, and I'd like to do something based around that." And I thought, gee, that's going to be hard to kind of do. That doesn't sort of come across as I couldn't quite get my head around it not being too much of a feel-good kind of do-gooder kind of exercise, as much as I'm sympathetic. I just thought, you don't want this stuff to kind of appear to it's got to have some real... Anyway, I agreed, and she started writing some lyrics, and they were very good, and I started putting some music together for it. And we got to a certain point where it needed some funding, to take it a little bit further, because that was the idea, to turn this into some sort of a production, and it needed to be done in good time. Anyway, we got turned down by everybody on it, and it kind of ground to a halt. So at the back of my mind was still, well, I still want to do Jean Lee, but I was struggling with the lyrics, and I just, talking to Jude, and she said, I'll give it a go. And she put together a few sets of lyrics, and I thought, wow, these are fantastic. And it just started from there, and it was a very, very quick process finishing it in terms of writing it. I mean, in some cases, I changed. We collaborated on the basis that she would write the lyrics, but I would do what I wanted with them, kind of thing. So her input on the way things actually sounded was, I didn't do much to the lyrics apart from maybe a little bit of, you know, twisting around here and there just to kind of fit into a shape that made sense melodically to me at that time. But so sometimes she was pleasantly surprised. Once or twice she said, "Oh, it's terrible." But anyway, yeah. So we, you know, did that. I decided, rather than, you know, go through the Arts Council kind of funding process and turn it into a stage play, I'll just turn it into a record, and then people will obviously be so impressed by this that they'll be throwing money at us. We got the record done, but nobody threw money at us to kind of take it further, sort of thing, which is a shame, because I think it could have actually been developed into something. That was the intention. It just, you know, anyway, it didn't happen, and then shortly after that a whole range of other things started happening, and I just didn't have the time to pursue it anymore.
You got distracted.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that was around the time when what did actually happen? I was touring a lot internationally, and then did the Clowns and the Bad Seeds thing, and the Saints in there somewhere as well, and
yeah, that's right. I mean, Yellow Dog, was that 2007?
Yeah. So that was around that time when...
And then the Saints reformed.
That's right, yeah. Yep. Which is, you know, time-consuming activity, the Saints reforming. One show, many months of detoxing.
Just coming towards the end, just tell me a bit more about that period before Dawn that you like writing in. Which albums or which songs have benefited from that before Dawn period?
It's never quite that cut and dry. There's sort of I'd say that there are, I mean, most recently there's a couple of songs on Lost Cities where significant bits of them were done in that period of time. They probably weren't completed then or recorded then, but they were sort of ideas kind of came together. But really it's a time that I like to think about it. I probably don't get that much done. You know, I just like the light at that time of day. I like the quiet. And as I say, I mean, I write it all different times, and it sort of depends on a whole range of things as to how many people are in the house. I like writing at the kitchen table kind of thing, you know.
With guitar?
And a, you know, cassette deck, or, you know, whatever the modern day equivalent is. And I think that's probably how I've written pretty much everything up until about certainly about the first 10-15 years of stuff were just done at the kitchen table. And then after that I got a special room.
Does that have to do with just feeling comfortable in your own home, your own environment, somewhere where you can...
Just to do with the fact that I didn't have a studio to kind of do it, and and if there's nobody else around, it's quite a comfortable way to work. Got a table, have a cassette deck, pen. Close to the coffee maker. That sort of thing.
I was going to say. Does writing songs get easier with age, Ed?
Certain aspects of things can get easier if you follow that sort of path. I don't know if it does really. I think there have been periods of time when I've been younger where I've written more. So no, I'm not really sure about that it gets easier. I think one of the things that gets harder is finding the time to do things. I really get this strange sense of often just not having any time whatsoever. I think this is something that's sort of becoming sort of widely recognised. I'm not sure if everything is just speeding up, or if it's just that as you get older everything appears to be speeding up.
Mm-hmm.
But no, I wouldn't say it gets easier. It possibly stays the same.
Mm.
There's always something that you're learning. There's always some obstacle that you have to overcome, and I don't think that's ever been any different. I think what I'm trying to do is maintain a certain sort of distinctiveness in what I do. I don't listen to very much music these days beyond just a quick flick through what's popular, or if somebody recommends something, but I don't sit down at length and listen to new albums by people, because it kind of just clutters things up in my head a little bit. And I do feel that I'm on to a way of working, and I need space to do that. I really don't want to hear what other people are doing, to some extent. I know that sounds sort of, it's not meant to sound dismissive. There could be some really great things. It's just that that's not what I'm looking for, kind of thing.
It kind of reminds me of what you said towards the beginning, how when you started learning guitar you weren't the kind of person who was trying to learn songs that were popular to impress your friends. You were just trying to make music that pleased you. It sounds like not much has changed in the last 40 years.
I think in a lot of ways I haven't changed particularly. I think it's that either means that I was right on the money when I was younger, or I'm sort of too thick to learn from my mistakes. I'm not sure. It's probably somewhere in between those two extremes. I think I want to make music. I go through periods of listening, but if I'm being creative, I don't do much listening. I tend to listen to other things if I'm in some kind of writer's block period or something, and then I have bad associations with that, so I don't even really enjoy listening to it, because I'm thinking, well, I can't fucking do anything, so why should I listen to anything else? I get no pleasure from it. So it probably hasn't changed, but sometimes going back over something, I think in a lot of ways I've always been like this, and I think people are often surprised, with the sort of accessibility of Facebook and things, and people will kind of say something and they just make an assumption that, you're in the Saints, you must have liked or known this and that, and I don't. I either don't like it or I didn't know it. I don't know why you assumed that I would or did. And it's always, I think that there is just a difference between sort of being focused on doing something that all the other things are kind of distractions in a lot of ways. But having said that, in the times where I do listen, I must absorb things fairly well, because I'm often, if I pull out a record or something that I haven't heard for years and years, I'm amazed at how well I remember it once I hear it back, but it's not something that if you ask me what's that like, I'd probably be stuck until I actually heard it again, kind of thing. And having said that, I don't listen to much music. I've got thousands of records and things, but I don't actually listen to them very much. I like them. I buy them for the covers often. I often buy records because I like the look of the cover. I think it's perfectly. I buy books because I like the cover too. I'm the most shallow consumer of the arts you could imagine.
You mentioned Facebook earlier, just quickly. It's been interesting watching the last few years. You've become quite active on Facebook, and you're engaging with fans and having back and forth.
It becomes really difficult, because, and I'm not complaining about this, but because of the way Facebook kind of operates these days, having a profile where you have a lot of friends and followers, or whatever they call them, subscribers or something, it doesn't work the way that it used to, because they determine what goes up on, so you can post something and it isn't necessarily what anybody actually sees. So it's becoming a bit useless from my perspective. I'm not that sociable a person really, but I was a reluctant joiner. I was talked into it, and it worked well, but they've done things to make it work less well. I think they are trying to force people like myself into a pay for your post kind of thing, which I've yet to see if that's actually worth the effort kind of thing. So we'll see.
My last question then is, does things like social media and interaction with fans, does that help your creative process? Or
no, it doesn't help the creative process. Sometimes it's incredibly depressing. You sort of do something and then somebody will make some comment and you think, oh, just why the fuck do I bother? But no offence to anybody, but sometimes people have got I suppose this kind of relates to what I was saying earlier about getting upset about reviews or that kind of thing. You just get to a certain point where you sort of think, it really doesn't matter, Some people will really like what you do, and they're not reasons that you think they should be liking you for. Why bother? Why bother getting upset about it? Just go with it. I've become quite philosophical. I used to be much more kind of hard line and sort of no, especially in the Saints and Clowns days. If you didn't like us for the right reasons, fuck off. Don't even come to the show. Here, take your fucking money back. These days, give me your money. It's okay. If you don't like it, just stand over in the corner.
Stand in the corner, exactly.
Yeah, I think the social media thing, it's probably kind of peaked a little bit just because they're intervening too much, and this is the Facebook Corporation or Twitter and all those various rather sinister outfits that are out there, But they were good for a while, especially operating as an independent, and they're not. I have a reputation for having, always getting good reviews, always getting good. It's not actually true, and in fact, oftentimes getting any kind of mention is hard. And so suddenly I was in a position where, I can review myself, and I did it quite well.
5 stars.
Always gave myself good ratings. And it worked, but as I say, it's kind of there's something odd. I don't follow it as much as I did a couple of years ago, but something has shifted in the way that the posts happen. I don't want to get too. It is important though. It's not like some people will kind of dismiss this stuff outright as if they're above it, which maybe they are. But as an independent operator, it can be quite a significant aid, but in the way that it did work, as opposed to what is seemingly happening now. And I'm not quite on top of how you can kind of make it work better. I think it there's probably a handful of other Australian musicians that might have a similar. Dave Graney is another person that does his, has a number of different profiles, and I'm sure he'll have the same sort of observations. But anyway, it's fast, and when it works, there's nothing like it when I started out. Just imagine if you had this kind of thing when the Saints started. We were posting out records, it was like 4 weeks before somebody would get something, then about another 6 weeks or 2 months until you'd see a review or something, and then another couple of months until someone had sent some money, and you're talking about a year down the line almost. It was a significantly slower operation. So no, it's got its pros and cons, and it does it does allow a degree of accessibility, for better or worse.
All right, final question. You've got to listen to Lost Cities in the next week or so to prepare for your upcoming tour. What will you be listening for? Will you be there with a pad and pen taking notes, or sitting there with the guitar trying to remember how to play things?
Just reminding myself of the mood more than anything else. I won't be doing identical sort of reproductions on stage anyway, but I just want to kind of remind myself of the bits that I like, remind myself of the bits that possibly can be done better, that sort of thing, just take it in a little bit, reacquaint myself. It hasn't been that long, so it won't take long to sort of, I'm kind of, this album is going to be a new album for me for quite a long time, but I'm also going to be doing other new albums, this is part of I'm excited by the sound of it. I'm excited by the sparseness of it, it has a certain sort of floating quality which I really like. It's something that has a quiet intensity which I really like. Makes it a little harder to kind of make an immediate impression with people, I think, especially live, because it will require a stronger sort of engagement on their part. It's not like here's a roaring kind of, in-your-face kind of rock thing. This is actually something that sort of will envelop people, but they have to be drawn into it, and that's sort of where, I see myself being for a while. I have a number of other songs that are songs and instrumental pieces that I'm sort of working on. It's developing, but it's all following what I've started on Lost Cities. So Lost Cities to me is the new Today Wonder. Without Today Wonder there wouldn't have been Honey Steals Gold, and there wouldn't have been Ascension by the Aints. As different as those records are, they all came out of something that I kind of landed on in Today Wonder. Very significant record for me. Almost wasn't released as well, so another one of those funny ones. And then, Honey Steals Gold almost wasn't an album. It started off as an EP. We turned it into an album because the record company said EPs make no sense. So I did another 4 songs.
Well, maybe we can touch on that in interview part 2 down the track.
Well, yeah, there's I think one of the funny things about when you kind of hear the truth behind what an album actually was, how it came together, I'm often surprised at albums that you kind of have this deep attachment to, and you read this kind of significance in, and then you read something about how it was actually done, and it's kind of academically interesting. Sometimes it's probably better not to have, if you're not able to kind of deal with the notion of, see, I have no problem retaining what the thing meant to me, and then finding out afterwards, well, they actually meant the exact opposite. I don't really care. I've never been into meeting my musical heroes. I hate the idea of meeting musicians for them, unless I'm working with them. I hate musicians. Worst people on the planet. It's so none of that stuff matters to me. I still, the albums that I really love, what they give out, they still give out, regardless of what I hear about how they were done. Makes no difference to me, So they have a certain power, and I think that's really great. So I feel comfortable about talking about this stuff in the future.
Great.
With you.
Thanks for talking to me today, Ed.
Well, my pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Penmanship, and thank you to my guest, Ed Kuepper. If you like this show, please review it on iTunes and share it with people in your life who love great writing. You can find show notes to this episode and all previous episodes at penmanshippodcast.com. If you'd like to email me, you can do so, andrew@penmanshippodcast.com. The theme song to this podcast, as ever, is Eternally Yours by Laughing Clowns. Thanks for listening. Till next time.